Hello, Jedi Writing Pie. My name is Dan Curtis-Cummins. I'm a fifth-year writing teacher here at San Francisco State in the English department and the composition program. And I'm also newly the director of the experimental college here. So I am here to talk to you all about reading, and specifically reading across the disciplines, applying principles of integrated reading and writing to your pedagogy as writing teachers in the disciplines. And I come with experience through the composition program, master's program about 5 years ago, as well as the certificate in teaching post-secondary reading. So I'd like to start with a little plug for the certificate. It's through the English department. I believe as faculty here for more than 6 years, you get a reduction in your tuition, which is nice. And it's 4 courses, which teach you many of the things that I'm kind of going to go over here. I also will say that some of the most social justice and linguistic justice oriented courses were through these classes. So as an overview of RAD, reading across the disciplines, I want to start to think about this in terms of equity and inclusion. And I frame this in terms of JEDI Pie because this is really the pre-established framework that we have through this amazing professional development that we have as faculty through CEDL. And so I'm also going to frame this overview of reading across the disciplines and its importance for your classes through a pre-reading process of the article by our very own Shuggie Goen-Salter and Helen Gelati-Trop. And they wrote an article back in 2003 that really formed the foundation of integrated reading and writing here at SF State, as well as my own framework and background teaching the stretch course, the stretch English course over 2 semesters, which is, as I'll show you, framed through an integrated reading and writing approach. These principles overlap with principles of equity, as well as principles of inclusion in terms of bringing students from many different backgrounds into the discourse communities of your discipline through reading, and thinking about approaching that through reading and through the types of readings that you choose. The third premise repeats Goen-Salter and Gelati-Trop's principle number 1 of integration, and really thinking about reading not as an add-on or not as a teaching step prior to content or prior to writing, but teaching it integrated with and developing ways to create visible teaching reading strategies within your pre-existing frameworks. And then premise 4, actually giving students different visible strategies to use and to try out collaboratively that make reading visible and that show them different ways that they can learn and read visually and learn collaboratively as well. And so to start to make reading visual, starts to make learning visible, and starts to feed into the 5th premise of having a flexible mindset and being able to apply different strategies to different situations in students' lives. And so this really comes down to the value of metacognition in our teaching and the value of long-term transfer in our teaching. And all of this boils down to modeling as readers how we make meaning of texts in different situations through annotations, through active reading, through visualizations in some situations. So the first principle, thinking really in terms of equity, as you'll read in Goen-Salter and Gelati-Trop's article, they show that through research and through their pilot project of this integrated reading and writing curriculum, that students of color who are in the previously remedial courses that were done away with around that time, that in this new pilot program, they succeed at higher rates. And this is specifically through courses that are framed around reading and writing. They move on to the 2nd-year courses faster, and they graduate from SF State at higher rates as well. And this reminds me of what I just learned in the JEDI Pi program through CEDL about educational debt. And this idea comes from Gloria Ladson-Billings originally, applying it to the discourse around an education gap between students of color and white students and speakers of other languages and mainstream English speakers. And again, through Goen, Salter, and Gelati-Tropp's article, research shows that the students who are at most risk of non-completion have been denied certain opportunities to learn and develop their literacy skills in their K through 12 education. And so I believe that we do need to apply the framework of education debt and think about as teachers, and we do have to repair and to heal their educational experiences of the past if we want them to be engaged and successful in our classrooms. And so teaching reading and writing is a part of that. Premise number 2, inclusion, really repeats Goen, Salter, and Gelati-Tropp's main principles of academic membership. To invite students from all backgrounds into the discourse community of your discipline, and to really frame reading as a conversation within that discourse community. This is also a chance to make intentional choices about the type of texts that you choose and from which authors, and to engage students with authors in their discipline that reflect their own experiences. Another point of this is genre analysis, which is founded in reading and writing in the disciplines, and also repeated in Goen, Salter, and Gelati-Tropp's principles of both sophisticated rhetorical analysis and creating sophisticated curriculum for otherwise known remedial courses, but also in their objectives that you'll read in the article around seeing reading as a rhetorical interaction. And so taking genre analysis and recognizing certain features of certain genres and recognizing the moves of certain writers and authors, and taking that even a step further to consider how different authors and writers bend those rules, bend those genre features and conventions, and what backlash or what resistance they get from their audience for that. The third principle is this idea of integration. And so that's the first principle of Goen and Gelati-Tropp's article. And it's the idea that reading is not taught before writing, but it's part of a recursive ongoing literacy process and development process. And so they cite in the article a kind of often held assumption, or back then, maybe perhaps even now, that reading should be taught by 3rd grade and that expository sophisticated writing should be taught by 12th grade. And so by that assumption, by its very nature, any reading or writing instruction in college is remedial. Both in challenging the short-term discrete skill that reading is taught at a certain time in a certain person's life, and not looking at it as a long-term developmental process, as well as the fact that reading, especially reading in one's discipline, can enhance their writing process as well, if it's done in certain intentional, visible ways that is analyzing different authors' moves and different genre features, that it can actually be part of a more sophisticated, more critical process of thinking and learning for your students. And so in this module, we'll actually ask you as participants to think about a pre-existing assignment or activity or project that you might reorient in terms of different reading strategies that students used to gain that knowledge and to engage in that conversation with that author. And not to think about reading as something that you have to teach before, and not to think of it as an extra assignment or something that you have to add on to pre-existing lesson plans, but more integrated within them. Premise number 4, and probably my favorite, is to make reading visible. And we are going to offer you 2 open educational resources, OERs, which are free of cost to you and students. And actually one of them is made and created by myself and Jolie Gorgon, the co-coordinator of this institute. And both of them have resources through chapter 2 primarily that show students different strategies for making their reading process visible. We also recommend that for your specific discipline and your specific classrooms that you model the active reading strategies that you use. And so that includes any annotation technologies that you use, reading guides or videos, and of course your own tricks. So I often show my students how I used to annotate on the book with a pen on paper inside the book with nobody got to see, and contrast that with certain new annotation technologies like Hypothesis that we're going to ask you to try out and experiment with in this module as well. This link here, if you're in the slides, is to the textbook by Jolie Gorgon and myself, Reading and Writing Your World. We'll ask you to go to chapter 2 to see some of those visible reading strategies. And I actually will take you there right now. One of the strategies that we'll highlight is this idea of reading like a writer. And I often repeat this phrase in my class. So to notice certain moves and certain rhetorical moves that writers in your discipline and writers that you admire make, and also noticing certain genre features and even the formatting used by those writers in your discipline as a very observant, intentional, purposeful way to read. This idea was first introduced to me by Ellen Carrillo's text, A Writer's Guide to Mindful Reading, which I had used in previous classes before I had developed the textbook with Jolie. And I also recommend that text. I think it's very valuable for your students as well. To give you a quick look at one of the examples of making reading visible, we go straight to chapter 2. Give you an idea of what the textbook looks like. You can see all the table of contents right here. This is an ongoing living text, so it will change and develop. It's the nature of OER and open educational resources. If I take you right to the second page of the chapter, we start to get into heuristics like KWL+, which is also introduced in Goen Salter and Gelati Tropp's article that you'll read. Other more practical strategies like skimming and scanning. We think it's important to review annotation and make that visible and make that a required part of your class. And like I said, model different strategies that you use. And then there are more, and here's reading like a writer. So this is where we encourage you to explore through this module and then consider how you might use different strategies that you read in here to reframe your existing assignments, activities, homework assignments, anything like that. The last premise is really to have a flexible mindset. And this again is where if we are teaching for lifelong learning, if we are teaching for transfer of some of these strategies and habits, then we want to both model for our students and teach in terms of using these strategies flexibly. In one situation, you might use a certain annotation strategy or a certain questioning strategy that you might not use in a different discipline or even in a different situation of their lives. And so to model how these different strategies might work in different contexts through your own experience really shows students and allows them to kind of take control and empower them to take control over their own learning. This is what I would call a really metacognitive literacy process, wherein students are seeing and recognizing their own learning styles, recognizing what they like, recognizing what works for them, and using that strategy in different situations of their choosing, that they have more agency over. And so with that thematic and theoretical framework, the next steps for this module are that we would love for you to create your free account with Hypothesis, which is an open resource, open source, nonprofit platform for annotating any open source web page. So this includes any PDFs that are hosted online, as well as any websites, videos that are hosted on sites. You can annotate in the margins of those and really create a live, vibrant conversation, be able to see your students' engagement with texts, and also be able to engage with them as readers by replying to their annotations. We will hopefully practice with your own annotations of the text by Goen Salter and Gelati Trout. Before diving into the text and annotating, it is more effective if you join a private annotation group. So we'll ask you to join the JEDI Writing Pi Hypothesis group by clicking the link in the guide. In the iLearn module, you'll notice a step-by-step guide for signing up with Hypothesis, and that will include the link to Hypothesis. In addition, we may add a link as well in the module itself on iLearn. And a last plug for Hypothesis in a remote learning context, which we will all continue in during spring semester, is that this is really a way to transform your texts and your web pages that you're already using online into much more collaborative spaces. So collaborative learning spaces that students can engage with each other in private groups or engage with you back and forth in. Again, it's more effective if you create a private group with your class. Feel free to use the step-by-step guide that I've created on the module for your students. And then eventually your students can transform these web pages, different texts that they find and research, and websites, even videos and visuals, into these online collaborative discussion and discussion forums and networks. And then we want you to dive into the article that I was outlining as I went through the different premises of RAD, reading across the disciplines. And we really just want you to focus on page 90 to 101 and annotate and reply to others' annotations. Think about how you might apply some of these ideas, principles, and objectives to your own course. And then, of course, engage with the ideas of others in this institute by exploring some of the OERs that we link in the module. And then in the discussion forum, exploring how you might reframe, again, one of your existing activities or projects within the framework of RAD to integrate some focus on making reading in your discipline visible and as a way in to writing more effectively and more intentionally in your discipline.